required details, but good evening, everyone. This is Gary Trendle, Chair of the Planning Board. It's Monday, August 23rd at 7 p.m. and I hereby call our meeting to order. This open meeting of Hopkinton Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with recently signed an act extending certain COVID measures adopted during the state of emergency. The act includes an extension until April 1st, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of the governor's March 12, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The new law has two major parts. First, the new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations of the public body, instead of holding meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. Adequate alternative means may include, without limitation, providing public access through telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the public body in real time. Second, the new law authorizes all members of the public body to continue participating in meetings remotely. The open meeting law's requirement that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present at the meeting location remains suspended. For this meeting, the planning board is convened by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting is being broadcast by HCAM through multiple channels and platforms. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda, unless I note otherwise. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, please permit me to cover some ground rules. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will invite board members to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. If members wish to engage in the dialogue with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Not every agenda item will feature public comment, but for items with public comment, please wait until you're acknowledged by the chair. Please identify yourself by name and address, and we will afford 3 minutes for any comments or questions. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call. So, members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Mary Larson Marlowe here.
Rob Benson.
Rob Benson here.
Jane Moran.
Jane Moran present.
Dave Paul. Don't see him on the list yet. Deb Feinberg. Deb, you're muted.
Deborah Feinberg is present.
I think Sundar Subramanian is running a little bit behind. Shahidul Manan.
Shahidul Manan here.
And Fran DeYoung.
Fran DeYoung is here.
All right, and staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Gelsich.
John Gelsich here.
Miss Pemberton.
Stephanie Pemberton here.
And Mr. Paradis.
Bill Paradis and Beta here.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. And I know that Sundar is said he had a last minute work conflict, so he'll join us at around 7:30. And hopefully Dave will be able to join us shortly. So as far as our agenda goes tonight, we have a couple of administrative items, which we'll go ahead and take care of first. Then we have 3 public hearings, 2 of them related to 52 Wilson Street. We have a stormwater management permit application and a earth removal permit application. Both of those are continuations. I'm actually going to recommend that we go through the earth removal permit application first, because I think it is a little bit simpler. And then we also have the continued public hearing for Turkey Ridge Estates, formerly known as Deer Ridge Estates. So let's go ahead and work through the administrative items first. And the first one of those is an appointment for the alternate seat for the Design Review Board. And we have one application from Jeff Doherty. And Jeff, I know, has served on the design review board for some period of time. And I don't see him on here, but before we move forward with a nomination, are there any questions or comments with regards to Mr. Doherty's application? And if not, then I will entertain a motion to appoint Jeff Doherty to the alternate seat of the design review board.
Mary
I would
Larson, Marlowe,
second.
so moved.
I'll second.
All right, Mary with the motion, Jane with the second. Assuming no further discussion, we will move to a roll call vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson, Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Shahadul?
Faisal Manan, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes. So congratulations to Mr. Doherty, and appreciate all of your service to the town across multiple fronts. The second administrative item here is related to 17 Main Street. And for anyone in the public that may not be familiar with it, 17 Main Street is a building almost across from Town Hall that had a fire in it maybe about a year ago now. And and they are looking at, as they renovate the property after the fire, they're looking at making some minor changes. And we need to determine if that property should go through a minor site plan review. So maybe I'll just quickly ask John if you have any additional information, considerations, or recommendations with regards to how or with regards to this agenda item.
Sure. So just to clarify, they are going for site plan review no matter what. The question is whether we should send it to beta for them to review. And then we would come up, the planning board can determine a scope if they think it's appropriate for this to be reviewed by beta. So the background of this is that it was a house and offices that, or apartments and offices that caught on fire. The upper levels need to get replaced. The bottom, I think not too much damage happened to them, but now they're using this opportunity to expand a little bit. And so they've submitted stormwater data and information, and obviously the plans. It's a minor site plan because they're not increasing this gross floor area by more than 5,000 square feet, and they're not altering the parking lot, meeting the major site plan criteria. So it falls under minor site plan. The question is, should this go before beta for a review? And if so, what aspects of the development should they review? Usually minor site plans don't go to beta for review, but this one's a little unique.
So John, just a little bit more background. If they don't usually go to beta for review, then why are we considering that in this situation?
So this one, they're kind of triggered by a lot of the issues that are going on right now with stormwater. This is downtown. Stormwater is becoming a bigger issue even this year. So making the site different in stormwater characteristics potentially could have larger impacts here than elsewhere. So the consideration is, should beta review for stormwater? Likely no significant impacts for traffic, likely no significant impacts for other aspects of the development. It's my concern personally is really if this is going to impact stormwater, and especially in the downtown area, because as we know, there's really not many places for stormwater to go there right now. So managing it properly is a concern, heightened by this recent summer.
Yeah, so thank you, John. I think personally, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'd also say that if these modifications did create a bigger stormwater issue, then given the density of buildings there, it feels like there are probably less mitigation opportunities if it did need some redesign. So I'll just share my thoughts. I tend to like John's recommendation of having Beta review this, but only focused on the stormwater related issues, just given its location and making sure that we've properly addressed the stormwater issues before it gets built. I'll open it up to other planning board members. I'm curious to see if people have thoughts otherwise, if they have questions or thoughts on the subject.
Well, through the chair, my initial thought is it couldn't hurt.
Yeah, I think the only downfall is that there's some additional cost incurred to do this, and that's where I think that we could probably be reasonable, and if we focus on the stormwater aspect, then
just keep it.
I think I'd also argue that that's probably one of the areas where we rely more heavily on Beta, because I think the stormwater components are much more complex. It's still going to go through the minor site plan review anyways, so we'll have an opportunity to review the other changes to it. But the stormwater piece in particular seems like it's worth having Beta's review.
To the chair, I think certainly it sounds reasonable from John's perspective, and thanks to your commentary on that. I wanted to understand a little bit, so a clarification question for John. I think you mentioned that the expansion is on second floor and repair on the third floor, if I understood correctly. How would that contribute differently to the current stormwater situation?
So the expansion is not just on the second and third floor. That's just where the fire was. They're expanding the footprint. It's just not 5,000 gross floor area square feet larger, which would trigger a major site plan approval. So anything under 5,000 GFA change is a minor site plan. So they are proposing to modify the ground floor as well.
Got it. Thank you.
And if I can
Yes.
ask questions. So as far as the parking lot and the hard surface, John, that's changing as well?
So it's already paved, but they are expanding the building, I believe, into the parking area. So it would just be seeing how the changes to the building would affect the stormwater management on site.
And yeah, I'm looking at the drawings that they are doing some water mitigation work as well at the end of the drive. And I don't want to repeat what you said, but it's true. The situation last week or this last storm was pretty evident that, and the fact that we'll be getting more storms at higher levels of water. I think it's a good idea as well.
All right, anybody feel otherwise, or that we should be more inclusive, or any opinions to the contrary of what we've discussed thus far? All right, and Mr. Richardson, are you representing the applicant?
I can, yes, I am.
Okay, I just saw you on, and I saw you unmute yourself, so I didn't know if you had any. Again, we're not getting into the review now, but
Sure.
just figured I'd check in and see if that was a reasonable approach from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. Again, just to be clear, we are adding about 4,000 square feet of space to the project. And we are still in compliance with parking because of the 50% reduction of parking in the downtown. That being said, the additions are actually going to be built out over the sidewalk that currently services the back office areas on the first floor. So essentially, we're not really increasing any impervious area. Nevertheless, we are obviously going to be adding an underground retention area. So again, anything we could do to obviously satisfy the board's requirements, but minimize the cost to the client for review is sincerely appreciated.
Okay. All right, so just based on this discussion, I will, and John, please correct me when I misspeak what I'm about to say. I'll entertain a motion to determine that Beta review the stormwater management plan associated with the 17 Main Street minor site plan review.
So moved.
Second.
All right, John, was that?
That sounds fine to me. I would actually reach out to Phil and see if that would give him the latitude to do what he thinks would be necessary.
Mr. Paradis, does that seem like a reasonable approach to you?
Sure. No, I think these types of situations, I mean, from what I just heard, it sounds like he's got a recharge system and or subsurface storage system. So I think we'll just be evaluating to see if that, you know, typically in these kind of settings, and at least in some other towns, we have, you know, the roof water recharged, and you know, so I don't think it's probably going to be heavy lifting if he's contemplated that already.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move to our roll call vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
I still don't see Dave here. Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar? Sundar's not here yet. Shahadul?
Kaiser Manan, yes.
Fran?
Fran Dion, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes, so that motion carries. The last administrative item tonight is,
Chair?
yes,
Can I just make one clarification to Mr. Richardson and Phil
of course.
before we move on? So Beta will now with this vote make a scope of what their work is going to be. That will come up with a fee. And then Scott will send that to you as soon as we have it from Beta. And then as soon as you provide us the check for the fee, Beta can get started on the review. And this is on the agenda for the September 13th meeting. So we have a little bit of time, but I'm sure you want to get started as soon as we do. So just want to let you guys know the process. Okay. Okay.
Through the chair, Jane Moran will be a yes on that as well.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate the clarification. And Mr. Richardson, look forward to hearing about the project on September 13th. So the last administrative item we have tonight is minutes from July 2nd, or excuse me, July 12th, 2021. And if I recall, I think, Deb, you were gonna work with Stephanie on some minor modifications. I'm gonna assume that those have all been incorporated. Are there any other comments or questions? I see Deb raising her hand. Go ahead, Deb.
Yes, sorry, Gary. That was from minutes while you were gone. That was from, I think, 20. It was the prior minutes to these. These are different.
Okay. I apologize.
But I do have one contribution. Hang on, I've just got to try to. But I had a question for John. So John, there was a clarification that was asked when I was talking. Hang on a second, let me try to find the minutes again. I'm sorry. It's just, okay. Sorry about this. There was a question I had asked about the difference between registered and unregistered land. And it wasn't really a statement that had been made, John, but I thought it would be a really good clarification to let people know in general, just for their general knowledge base. So does that not go in the minutes and I just state it here so people can sort of have it as a reference for future? Or do we actually put it sort of in parentheses in section F where I ask the difference?
So through the chair, minutes are a record of the meeting that took place. So if it did not happen during the meeting, then it does not go in the minutes.
Well, it happened, but it wasn't the
The
exact.
clarification did not happen at the meeting, so the clarification does not go in the minutes.
Okay. All right.
If you ask the question, that can go in the minutes. But if the question was not answered at the meeting, the answer does not go in the minutes because that
Well,
would give the false impression that the question was answered at the meeting, which it
The
wasn't.
question was answered, but it wasn't answered as clearly as it could have been answered, but it wasn't my words that weren't clear.
No. So you can't go back and change the wording that didn't happen at the meeting. So even if it was unclear, you can't go back and clear it up with a better description because that's not what happened at the meeting.
Okay. All right, that's what I wanted to know. But just for people's edification, if you want to Google registered and unregistered land, it's kind of an important distinction for sort of future meetings and clarification should something come up in that definition.
Thanks, Deb. John, I have one question for you. Given that the select board was also a part of the July 12th meeting, then do they review and approve these minutes as well?
So that was a joint meeting, right? But the
Yes.
planning board had their own meeting and the select board had their own meeting. So the select board has their own set of minutes that they will also review that is really focused on the select board minutes. It's going to be basically the same thing, but it's the select board's version. And they'll approve those. The planning board approves their version.
Okay.
Essentially the same thing, but they do it separately.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions or comments on the minutes? And if not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from July 12th, 2021.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Rob Benson, second.
We have a motion and a second. Assuming no further discussion, we will take a vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Shahadul?
Rajul Manan abstain. I wasn't part of the meeting.
Fran?
You're muted.
Sorry, Brandy Young, yes.
It's all right, Fran. We all fall asleep sometimes. And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. So that motion carries. All right, let's go ahead and move to our public hearings. So I will entertain a motion to open the public hearings for the stormwater management permit application at 52 Wilson Street, the earth removal permit application at 52 Wilson Street, and we'll also open the Turkey Ridge Estates public hearing.
Brandy
Mary
Young.
Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Jane
Mary,
Moran, second.
All right, Mary with the motion and Jane with the second. And we'll, assuming no further discussion, we'll vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Deb? Deb seems to have stepped away. Shahadul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Fran?
Brandy Young, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. So I see Tracy, I see Jim. Is there anybody else that we want to unmute?
Yep. Mike 2 is here also from Eversource, Dan Boulay from Ty and Bond, and Tim Grace from Ty and Bond.
Okay, welcome. And I realized that I suggested that we start with the earth removal permit application. Is that okay by you guys? Because I think that one is a little more straightforward, and I'd love to at least get through that one tonight. So any objections to starting with the earth removal permit?
Nope.
Nope.
None.
Okay. So I realize I'm going to make people bounce around a little bit in our meeting packet, but again, I think that makes sense. And just for the public, we do have a public hearing outline. It's in the meeting packet, section 3.2. And what we've done thus far is we've gone through the project introduction and review from the applicant, the staff report, the initial beta report, and I know that we had a site visit. Unfortunately, I could not attend, but I always hate to miss those. They're super useful for us to get a perspective as to the site itself and some of the different constraints and limitations. So next on the agenda for us is review of decision criteria. And we'll work through that a little bit and then move forward from there. Before I get into that, just really quickly for the applicant, are there any updates or changes for us as a board that is different from the previous, or any modifications or changes from the previous discussion a few weeks ago?
No, we have provided a revised set of plans and answers to Beta's questions with regards to the stormwater. And we have also provided a waiver request for the 100-foot waiver this is specifically for the earth removal permit for access to and from the site. And we also noted in that waiver that there is a portion of the work that is within 100 feet of the Tennessee Gas Company property line as well. So that waiver incorporates, the 100-foot waiver incorporates both of those areas.
Okay.
But there have been no changes to the access road design or the stormwater design from what we had previously discussed.
Okay. And just thinking about maybe what we'll do is, I'm just going to quickly review the decision criteria, and then maybe we'll go back to Beta, because I know that they had, I think, just one open item of which they were deferring to the planning board on. So I think if we can go ahead and close that out, then that can help us move things along. So as far as the decision criteria goes, just as a reminder, pursuant to section 96.6, criteria for issuance of permits, the following criteria is to be met before an earth removal permit can be granted. A, the applicant for a permit shall have the burden of proving by a preponderance of the credible evidence that the work proposed in the permit application will meet the requirements of this chapter. B, earth removal permits may be granted by the board if it finds each of the following. 1, the proposed earth removal conforms to the purpose of this chapter. 2, the earth removal operation on the permit lot will not, A, be injurious or dangerous to the public health or safety. B, produce noise, dust, or other effects detrimental to the normal use of adjacent property. C, have a material adverse effect on the health or safety of persons living in the neighborhood or on the use of amenities of adjacent land. D, the earth removal activity will not result in traffic conditions on roads in the areas of earth removal activity, which will cause unsafe and dangerous conditions. Or E, the regulations contained in this chapter will be complied with. So just to remind everyone, that's what we should be evaluating this earth removal permit application upon. So let's turn it over to Mr. Paradis. And I know that there was one outstanding item that you had identified. Phil, are you able to just explain that quickly to us?
Yeah, so your bylaw requires providing 8 inches of loam and seed of the entire area where the removal has taken place. So that's what's required under the bylaw. And I think the response from Time Bond was that the nature of the area is such that they want to reduce the maintenance of the property. So
yeah, so my understanding is they're just saying that it will either be bituminous pavements or stone cover, as opposed to the 8-inch loam.
Correct.
So question for the applicant, is this just cost and maintenance savings, or is there some other rationale? And I see Mr. Blackburn is eager to say something, so.
We typically try to keep any grassed areas outside of the fence line. We try to push everything back about 10 to 15 feet outside of the fence line, just because it can promote a fire hazard. So obviously we're very sensitive to that. So that's one of the primary reasons why we really don't have any vegetation within the fence line.
Okay. And that's just one person's opinion, but having gone by the site a number of times, I would concur there's not a lot of vegetation on the inside of the fence line.
For the chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, just on our sidewalk, it was very consistent with the current state of the project area. So it's all gravel and stone dust.
Okay. Any opinions to the contrary to that from the planning board? Seems reasonable to me. Okay. Well, thanks, Phil, and thanks, Jim, for the additional clarification. So let's go back to the decision criteria, and we're just going to go through these quickly, and we can talk about each of them. And the first one, well, I guess there's probably not a lot of discussion around the proposed earth removal conforms to the purpose of this bylaw, but I think it's worth a little bit more discussion if there is any impact that could make, or anything that could make it injurious or dangerous to the public health or safety. Any questions or comments with regards to that component of the decision criteria? I'm seeing no. And by the way, also just to try and accelerate this conversation, if there are members of the public that have comments about these, each of these specific topics, then I'd rather kind of get through the topic and then move on to the next one so that we don't have to go back and repeat. Ms. Towner, we can unmute you. Oh,
Are you just talking about the earth removal?
At this point, we're only talking about the earth removal. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So I don't see or hear anything about injurious or dangerous to public health. The second one, produce noise, dust, or other effects detrimental to the normal use of adjacent property. The third, have a material adverse effect on the health or safety of persons living in the neighborhood or on the use of amenities of adjacent land.
So, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Fred.
Maybe just going back a second on the noise on the second one there. You know, maybe just an overview of, I know there's a fair amount of earth that is going to be displaced, and it will be transported by truck within the facility or somewhere else, or what is the plan to have that earth moved around? And maybe it's through the chair to the applicant.
Yes, I see Tracy unmuting.
And Mike as well. So if Mike wants to jump in, but we're trying to use the material on site as much as we possibly can. And any material that needs to be moved out off site, you're correct, we'll be trucking that off through Wilson Street, probably to Rafferty Road or Legacy Farm North.
Got it.
Any idea what percentage of the total volume will be moved off-site versus kept on-site?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Mike.
We have Tim Grace on the phone, who was the engineer that did the detailed engineering. But our cut fill calculations show that we are hardly moving anything off site. We will be trenching in new electrical conduit and a new water line associated with the project. And those spoil materials we've made provision for to be moved off site if needed, as a finished grade is established and we aren't able to successfully kind of lose those spoils, so to speak, during
Yeah.
execution of the job.
It never goes back in quite the way it came out, does it?
No, sir, not when you're putting 12-inch water pipe in the ground and conduit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear, and I think I know for me, I've just given I think the old Rafferty Road has been repaved since I've seen last, but I know that road has also taken a beating over the years, so it's good to hear that we can minimize the material that's taken off site. Fran, did you have any follow-up questions or?
I think at this part, I'm okay, although there's some very interesting comment there around the trenching and conduit that's going to be laid down. So I'll hold those questions till the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, so back to the third bullet, have a material adverse effect on the health or safety of persons living in the neighborhood or on use of amenities of adjacent land. Questions, comments related to that decision criteria?
Mr. Chair, through the chair, if I may, would that also include stormwater runoff potentially onto Wilson Street?
So my interpretation is that that point would fall under the stormwater management plan.
Okay.
So we're only going through the earth removal permit at this point. Okay, and then the last one is that the removal activity will not result in traffic conditions on the road in the area or the activity which will cause unsafe and dangerous conditions. And sounds like one, there won't be a lot of trucks moving materials off site. And secondly, I know we have a number of conditions with regards to timing and other factors with regards to that type of activity.
Through the chair, just for clarification, so what you just said to, does that mean that the mitigation would be coordinating around the traffic and the road conditions and such things?
It's a good question. I'm not sure there is any mitigation required because the traffic is going to be minimal. That being said, we always include conditions, based on our bylaws and standards with regards to when construction activities can be performed.
Thank you.
All right. So before we get to discussion on the waivers, any other comments specific to the earth removal permit application? And from either the board or I see Chief Slamman. Chief Slamman, welcome to, I think, your last planning board meeting.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a comment. Some of the water pipe references and basically the road access improvements that are happening are very beneficial to the fire department. They're not really code required. They're just show a good faith cooperative effort with Eversource doing some work on the project. And I've asked them to review some of the parts of their fire protection when they do that. So I just figured I'd offer that comment to the board that, it is a nice gesture towards us and improves access and our ability to get at more water.
All right, thanks, Chief. Any other general comments or questions before we get to the waiver discussion? And if not, there is one waiver request, and that is with regards to they're requesting that the 100-foot buffer be reduced to 60 feet along the Tennessee Gas Pipeline property line and for site access. And so I guess I did see a note earlier from town council. And they had some questions about whether there really was an intrusion into the 100-foot buffer just based on the town GIS map and some other things. So I'm curious if the applicant can just go into a little bit more detail as to how that intrusion or that potential intrusion into the 100-foot buffer was determined, and some perspective on the accuracy of that estimate.
Through the chair, I think I can probably jump in before the applicant talks.
Okay.
So I had a conversation with town council this afternoon about this. So a couple points that I wanted to make. They've requested a waiver for the 100-foot buffer for the entrance and exit points, and then that one area within the 100-foot buffer. However, and this is all going to be very, I don't want to say technical, but very nitpicky. And I think we can come to a good resolution. I just want to share a map to show you what I'm talking about while I talk about it. So this is the town's GIS. This is the site. There are multiple areas where they're within the 100-foot buffer. And I think what town council and I have come to as a resolution on how to pose this waiver question to then grant it, if that's what the board decides, is to basically state it as any areas currently within the 100-foot would be waived. So that's this whole property line, because clearly there's, right up against the property line, all around here, up to here, and you've got some work over here, and then this area over here. So obviously the outer edges have the 100-foot buffer, but all of these are pre-existing. And so it's kind of an issue with the way that the bylaw is worded. I've always interpreted it as the work that is being proposed as within the 100-foot buffer needs to be waived. That is not how town council has interpreted it, and reading it again, that's really not how it's written. So that's a side note. That's probably something that we may want to look at changing in terms of the bylaw, because it requires a waiver for stuff that might not even be related to the application before the board. And this is one of those examples of this whole area being within the 100-foot buffer. So what town council has suggested, and I hope I'm repeating this properly, is that we can do one of two things or both things. The board can make a finding that the site is no more visible than it would be with the 100-foot buffer. And it's impractical to require screening in these areas, because that is what we interpret the intent of the buffer to do, and then grant the waiver for all of the areas that are currently existing within the buffer zone or the 100-foot buffer. Or we could just grant the buffer, if that's what the board chooses, for the areas within the 100-foot buffer and kind of move forward from there. But town council thought it was appropriate to cover all of this so that there, is an explanation for it, and that there's no questions moving forward as to what the waiver is for, and then any other property in town that goes for it, it's kind of a consistent application of the bylaw. So I know that was a lot, but happy to answer any questions.
So John, just to clarify, so option one there is with the finding that basically shows that impedance within the buffer zone doesn't have any meaningful impact. Option two is basically just granting the waiver to reduce that 100-foot buffer to 60 feet along the TGP property line.
So I think, there's two options, and you can do, I would say either both or just the waiver. So the one option is have the finding saying that you're granting the waiver because there's really it's impractical to apply the buffer in these situations, since the screening would be impractical to put in, and there's really no difference between the existing conditions and what you would do if you were to require the screening, and therefore you can apply this waiver on all these areas. The second part of that being granting a waiver, not just for the entrance and exit points and the 60-foot encroachment on the TGP property, but for all of that that's currently in the buffer, because as we can see by the map, it does cross into the 100-foot buffer in many places. And in order to kind of capture everything and not literally label every single location where it goes into the buffer. Is just saying, at the time of this permit, any place that is within the buffer is granted a waiver as it already exists, and then use that finding to make that explanation as to why the waiver is granted. So you could do that. I would say you either need to do the waiver alone or the waiver and the finding, not just the finding, because that doesn't give the applicant what they need.
Understood. Questions or comments from the board?
Through the chair.
Yes, Mary.
I am in favor of doing the finding because I think it's important to address in the minutes and in the records that that this is pre-existing, and that we, through the site walk and everything like that, we have determined that this does not affect the visibility of the site. It's very true that it does not. And so it is, it's not a practical application of this particular aspect of the bylaw.
Fran.
Mr. Chair, I would concur with Mary's overall general assessment. My question is back through the chair to the principal planner, is that does this then, for future instances where this potentially would it also apply across the board, where you could look at it from a finding perspective, where there's situations where they impede upon a defined buffer zone? Or is it just the individual request, waiver request as defined by an applicant?
So I don't know if I quite understand the question, but I'll try and explain it with the precedent moving forward in our thinking. All of these waivers for the 100-foot buffer for earth removal have been granted because there's only been like 5 applications, right? So it's written in a way that is very difficult to enforce as it stands, or without a waiver, because how is anyone going to access a site if there's no entrance and exit incursions into the 100-foot buffer? So there's always going to be a waiver if somebody's trying to access the site. What this would do is make a finding that these incursions are already existing. Applying the buffer would not make the intent of the buffer happen, because it wouldn't change the visibility of the site. So in this situation, the existing conditions almost negate the need for the buffer in those areas, because the buffer wouldn't change the situation on the ground. And so that would be really a site-specific finding, that if somebody were to use the precedent in a green field that hasn't been developed, that buffer waiver probably wouldn't be granted for the entire site, because there would be a assumed vegetative buffer in those areas. With existing developments, that's kind of how we've always applied it, is that it's been applied differently, and because I guess there hasn't been a lot of guidance, but in certain situations, the waiver has always been granted because you can't access the site. And then when there is already an existing incursion, the waiver is granted for that as well. So I think we're just keeping with what we've been doing on this. We're just expanding it to include all of the existing developments within the buffer, to make sure that it is consistent with the bylaw and kind of covers everything that is already on the site, so that we're not leaving anything out.
So just to sort of summarize, John, it sounds like you don't anticipate this additional finding creating any new difficulties with either past or future applications.
No, I don't think so.
All right. So I tend to agree with both Mary and Fran. I think that we've learned from past experience that findings are always super helpful for us in this situation, particularly in explaining some of these kind of unusual circumstances. So anybody disagree or feel that finding is not necessary or warranted? Okay. So John, just a question, because per our outline, we would vote on the waiver first and then move to the findings. Given that the waiver is also somewhat dependent on the findings. Should we discuss the findings first and then the waiver, or can we just assume that the finding will be there and we can vote on the waiver?
It doesn't matter. If you want to discuss the findings and vote on the findings and then vote on the waiver, you can do that too.
Okay, let's do that just because I think that's a little bit cleaner, especially if the waiver is going to reference the finding.
So just to clarify through the chair, there'd be two findings. One the one that's written in the memo, 3.8.1.
Yep.
And then the other finding would be essentially that the site is no more visible than it would be with the 100-foot buffer applied, and it would be impractical to require screening in these areas that are currently within the 100-foot buffer.
Okay. So let me see if I get this right. And I'm just gonna, I will entertain a motion that the board finds that the proposed earth removal activities conform to the provisions of Chapter 29 of the general bylaws of Hopkinton, that all applicable criteria and standards set forth in the earth removal chapter, specifically section 96.6 criteria for issuance of permits, have been satisfied. And that, oh gosh, help me out here, John.
The site is no more visible than it would be with the 100-foot buffer applied, and therefore it would be impractical to require screening in the areas that currently encroach on the buffer.
Thank you. As our principal planner just stated.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Deborah Feinberg, second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion before we vote on these findings? All right, and seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. So we'll start with Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave, welcome to the meeting, and I'm glad you're right side up. I don't know, I don't think you've been here for the full discussion.
Yeah, I can pass.
Okay. Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar, have you been here for the whole discussion on this one?
I was here when you started discussing the findings, Mr. Chair. So I wasn't here at the start.
Okay.
Definitely.
So how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Okay. Shahidul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Fran?
Indian, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. On the waiver, I will entertain a motion do we accept waivers? What's the right terminology here?
Through the chair, you would approve the waiver. However,
Yes.
I think we need to change the wording of the waiver, if it's okay with the applicant, to say the entry and exit points as proposed on the plans, the 60-foot, the reduction of 260 feet adjacent to the TGP site, and the existing incursions on the ground as of this date.
To the applicant, are you comfortable with that?
Tracy, does that do anything on I'm not as familiar with the layout that you all ended up landing on, but on the eastern portion of the project, does that create an issue? Or was there no issue with the buffer on that side?
No issue with the buffer on that side. So I think if I followed the conversation is that I think our initial interpretation was that we were only requesting the buffer zone for the work that is associated with the earth removal activities or the project. However, it sounds like town council's interpretation is that the waiver is needed for all of the existing incursions within the 100-foot buffer as well. So this change to the decision reflects that change in interpretation, or that interpretation that they're granting the waiver for everything that currently exists within that 100-foot buffer zone.
That's correct.
And through the chair, I guess, John, that's, I assume, specific to the work associated with this permit. So the earth removal, I mean, if we do other projects in the future at the site that aren't subject to an earth removal permit, I guess I'm just questioning, does that do anything to that buffer that we've now requested as part of this permit? Is there any interaction between future work in this?
So earth removal permits are really construction only permits. Once the earth removal activities are over, the permit essentially is done and complete. So if you would be doing future work after a closed earthwork removal permit, you wouldn't need to then go and amend the previous earth removal permit. It's only if you were then to go for another earth removal permit, you would have to request a waiver from the buffer for those, for any new incursions on that site. So like I said before, this is just an odd way that the bylaw is written. And it's something that we need to take a look at because it effectively requires a waiver for any existing incursions in the buffer on a site that is being applied for an earth removal permit, even if those incursions have nothing to do with the permit at hand, which is the situation here.
So, I mean, I think our goal is to make sure that this revised waiver doesn't have any impact on what you're intending to do. It's just a little bit of cleanup to make sure that everything that is being proposed and the work that's being done conforms with our bylaws as they are written.
I think it's a little confusing and tough to follow, but it doesn't sound like it's a problem, what the way you're proposing to amend it. Tracy, do you have any concerns with it?
I don't, and I think as John explained it, you know, that there's other buffers that if you're doing development like that are zoning related that we would need to consider, but this is strictly for the earth removal permit. So once those earth removal activities are completed, my understanding is that 100-foot buffer is no longer kind of enacted, if that's correct, John.
Yeah, that doesn't mean, yeah, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board or members of the public on this? Yes, Katie.
So
if you can just quickly, I know you already did it, but if you can introduce yourself and tell us your address.
Oh, Katie Towner, 9 Kruger Road. So this is just a waiver to allow the existing incursion on the entry and exit on Wilson Street so you can access the property.
Yes.
So any incursions into the 100-foot buffer on the rest of the perimeter of the property are not waived by this?
Yes. So what we're saying is that what's waived is the entry and exit points, the proximity to the Tennessee Gas pipeline property, and any existing incursions to date. So if they were to remove earth within the 100-foot buffer that was not related to those three things, then that would not be allowed in this earth removal permit.
So this would allow them to remove earth within 100 feet of the pipeline?
Yes.
Well, that,
It would reduce it to within, they couldn't within 60 feet instead of 100 feet.
So through the chair, that I don't
No,
think,
am I wrong?
this is a very confusing situation. So
Okay.
the bylaw requires a 100-foot vegetated buffer around the perimeter of the site when you have earthwork removal taking place. That's obviously a tricky situation because any project would need a waiver to access the site, because you can't just, I mean, I guess you could fly a helicopter in there and do work, but that's not realistic. So what I think the point was, is if anyone does earthwork removal, you want it screened from the neighbors. However, in certain situations like this, and in other situations, you've got existing buildings within the 100-foot buffer that are not part of the work, but still exist. And therefore, by the way that the bylaw is written, they would need to get a waiver for those areas, even though they're not part of the project, because the bylaw requires a 100-foot buffer around the entire site. So that would be impractical in this situation, because you've got a parking area, you've got buildings, you've got what looks like tanks already in the 100-foot buffer. And that 100-foot buffer is only really applied once the application for an earth removal permit comes into play. That buffer is not part of another area of the regulations. So you've got these applications for earth removal going into existing properties that already encroach on the buffer area, and therefore they have to get a waiver for those encroachments, even though the work is not within the buffer area, and that's the situation here.
So
That's
Katie,
not
let
the
me
question I asked.
hang on one sec, Katie. Let me clarify, because I think I misstated previously. What this is suggesting is that it would reduce the buffer along the TGP property line to 60 feet, not necessarily to the pipeline itself.
And through the chair, the work that they're proposing is on the plans. They would need to do the earthwork removal per the plans. That has nothing to do with the buffer. The buffer is just a vegetated screening required by the bylaw. This would be a waiver from providing that buffer, since it would be impractical in a lot of these situations to require them to plant a buffer to comply with the bylaw. And especially since there might be buildings or other structures within that 100-foot buffer. This doesn't change where they can do earthwork according to the plan. The plan shows where they can do the earth removal. This just allows them to not provide a vegetated buffer in those areas.
So are they planning any earth removal work within 100 feet of the pipeline?
Tracy or Jim, I think I know the answer, but I'll defer to you on that, since you know the plans better than I do.
Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I don't know what we're defining as the pipeline, but yes, there's transmission lines and other underground pipe within the area of this work. So we're certainly well within 60 feet of some of that. If you're talking about the Tennessee gas pipelines, those laterals are a little bit, they're on a different side of the facility, but there are other transmission, DOT transmission regulated pipelines on site that run, in and around the property. So I think from a technical perspective, yes.
Okay. Any final thoughts, Katie?
So, I mean, I would think the buffer would be more than just a visual, if the bylaw says it's supposed to be a buffer, I wouldn't think it would be limited to visual. It would be limited to, work you can actually do, in the buffer zone. So if they're planning on doing work in the buffer zone, they should say so.
So let me ask the applicant a different question. What earth removal work do you have planned in the buffer zone?
Jim, Mr. Chair, if I can
Go ahead, Mike.
address everybody here to clarify. So the fire access road to the west of that has a stormwater basin. So we would be digging down to an elevation of 485. The existing is 488 and 489. So we would be digging down from existing elevation to create the bottom of that stormwater basin. The existing pipelines running through that area. The elevations there are 486. In addition to that, the existing pipelines are buried. So even the deepest part of our excavation would be on top of the existing facility in that area. Does that help clarify a little bit?
Sorry, I think you clarified on the depth, but what about the distance?
The distance is roughly, just looking at the scale here, is the center of the stormwater basin, which we are calling number 4, is roughly 20 to 25 feet away from the buried facilities in that area.
Mr. Chair, is there a visual or illustration
I was just gonna say
that Mike's talking about that we could see? I don't know if John has that. I'm looking through my packet and I can't seem to find it.
Tracy, do you mind driving for a second?
Yeah, I can share my screen.
So I was just looking at C103 here. Okay, maybe if you go down to the grading and drainage plan here, this second detail. Okay, everybody, so the elevations that I was reading off to you are 45. That's the bottom of our proposed stormwater basin number 4 here. You can see Tracy down and to the left here. We took topo survey of some above grade topo features related to the pipeline that is buried in that area, and those lines run line of sight directly into the plant there. So the distance in which we would be working, putting a shovel into dirt, would be roughly 20 to 25 feet off of the center line of the existing buried facility. In addition to that, we would be typically we see 3 to 4 foot cover on assets of this nature and of this design. So we would be about 5 feet above the existing facility as well.
So, sorry, Mike, I'm not quite following. I guess what I think we're trying to understand is there going to be any earth removal within the revised buffer zone?
So if I might, so to go back to a similar plan to what John had up previously, where Mike's talking about is in this general location. So there's an earth or a basin that's located here. The property lines are, I'll say they're a little wonky. You know, they don't necessarily follow physical features on site per se. So, you know, I think these are the features that Mike was talking about, where there's a buried pipeline under here. So the work that we're talking about is over in this location here. And then there's additional work occurring. You know, again, the majority of the access road area is in through here. And then we're coming in with the additional fire access to connect to this road.
Okay, so all the work is being done on what's labeled here is 52 Wilson Street. The other, we just refreshed.
Sorry. So we're not close to this property line or this property line or this property line with the work that we're proposing. It's only this property line in here.
Yes, and that's the Tennessee Gas Pipeline property line.
Correct.
And so is any of that construction planned within 60 feet of that Tennessee Gas Pipeline property?
I think the earth removal activities were approximately 60 feet away from that property line.
Okay. Because to me, that's what's important, is that if we're gonna consider a waiver that reduces it to 60 feet, then my expectation is there's not going to be any earth removal within that 60 feet of the property line. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just ask Dan, can that confirmed?
Because if you're going to be within 40 feet, then the reality is I don't understand why we would be debating reducing the buffer zone to 60 feet if you're planning on construction within 40 feet.
Yes, I would say to be on the safe side based on the property lines we're looking at and the proposed work that we're showing, I'd feel more comfortable saying, let's go to 30 feet because although we're going to be doing work, we're not going to be excavating. We're going to be filling pieces of that. But to avoid any of the confusion of what we're calling filling or excavating, we will be working within 30 feet of the property line.
So can I just out of curiosity, how did you come up with the requested waiver to reduce it to 60 feet?
So the excavations are happening, but if we're concentrating more on the working activities, then we can go back to that. If that makes sense.
Okay. Mr. Paradis is our town representative consultant. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this and whether we should consider reducing that waiver to 60 feet based on the excavation or to 30 feet to enable them to cover themselves for any stockpiles or additional working space.
So I think my thought would be whatever the final buffer zone is going to be. So I assume, is this area treed right now? Is it open?
Open. Barren.
Barren. So I don't know that it makes a huge difference. I think if they're going to restore the particular area they need for staging this to existing conditions, then in practical terms, maybe the 60, where they're actually changing the topography would be the change in buffer. If it was treed and you're cutting another 30 feet of trees, then I think that would be a different change in the buffer, but
No, it's not.
Sorry, Jane, you want to explain your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's barren. It's pretty clear cut to me that they have to go in there and do what they need to do and leave it alone. Gotta leave it pretty much the way it was originally after they lay their pipes or do whatever they need to do.
All right.
Through the chair.
Yeah, Fran.
And to the applicant, is that the plan, Jim and Tracy, to essentially, restore the area in the buffer zone to its pre-disturbed state, or was there plan to put any type of tree or shrub or anything in there, given the fact now that the buffer zone is being reduced? Just curious.
In this area, it was to be restored in kind into what exists there today.
Except where the new stormwater basin is, correct?
Correct. And there's also going to be a new access road into here for the fire department and a new stormwater basin, and there'll be some trees planted actually on the other side, closer to the wetland over here.
Further down.
So I think it's really a mix because the buffer is 100 feet, we're encroaching on that in certain areas. And then other areas, we may encroach on it temporarily and then restore it back to the existing condition. So we have a little bit of a mix here, I think is part of the problem. But I think in all cases, Tracy, aren't we within the fence except for the roadway portion?
Yes.
Is there
except for this area right in here, where we're going to do that tie-in road,
right,
for the chief.
Chair, it's Dave.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So I just want to make one comment that, the applicants have been saying that they're within this buffer range because they're doing what was asked by the town to establish a emergency road. So I think we should take that into consideration in granting this waiver.
All right, so what I'm hearing is that we should revise the requested waiver to reduce the 100-foot buffer to 30 feet along the TGP property line, and for site access, including entry and exit ports and existing incursions of the buffer zone to date.
I have a comment.
Hang on one second, Katie. So I just want to get quick reaction from the planning board first as to that revised requested waiver, because I think that sounds like what is more representative of what the applicant is proposing to do here.
Agreed.
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 Okay. Katie, go ahead.
Okay, so with regard to the 100-foot buffer, I mean, you're considering visual impacts, but a 100-foot buffer to a pipeline on another property owner's property, I don't think that this board should be granting waivers. I don't think you have the right stakeholders here. I mean, to grant a waiver into a 100-foot buffer that abuts a pipeline, I think you need to consider more than just visual. I think maybe a little research into the, I mean, there's a 100-foot buffer there for a reason. And I think, that reason should include safety. I don't think you should be granting an incursion into a buffer zone next to a pipeline on another property owner's property.
Yeah, okay. Mary, you had a comment?
Thank you. Through the chair. This, the buffer we're discussing is a buffer between the property line and the work. It is not between a pipeline and the work. So that is one aspect that we need to consider. The other aspect is the fact that this is a bylaw that does not apply specifically to this particular property or this particular work. It is an overall, it's a bylaw for, all work and related to earth removal. And so we need to consider what the intent of that bylaw is. It is not established based on protection, safety of the public, protection from, work near a pipeline, because there are other safety measures in place to ensure that, no damage to a pipeline takes place. This is that this bylaw does not refer to that at all. So that's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mary. And just to add to that, in many cases, the even on the pipeline property itself, that pipeline is going to be well within 100 feet of the property line. So I would tend to agree with Mary that the intent of this is not to keep construction away from pipelines. So, all right. Any other? I think we're ready to move forward with a vote on this requested waiver. It sounds like the applicant is okay with that revision of particularly on the TGP property line to reduce it to 30 feet as opposed to 60. So I will entertain a motion to grant a waiver to reduce the 100-foot buffer to 30 feet along the TGP property line, and for site access at the entry and exit points, as well as existing incursions to date.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Deborah
Engelmann
Feinberg,
and
second.
All right, Mary with the motion, Deb with the second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, pass.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahdool?
Engelmann, yes.
Fran?
Fran Young, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. Okay, so conditions. We've got a lot of conditions here. This is my favorite part, as you all know. I am going to go ahead and quickly read through these conditions. And then if we have any others to consider, we can go through them at that point in time. So proposed conditions, number one, after finding that it was in the public interest and not inconsistent with the intent and purpose of the earth removal bylaw, the planning board waived strict compliance with the following provisions of the earth removal bylaw. The waivers of this provision allow construction activities as shown in the approved plan. And that specific waiver is with regards to the buffer zone as previously discussed. 2, proper and reasonable surface drainage shall be maintained at all times. There shall be no siltation, sedimentation, or pollution of Hopkinton Reservoir. 3, the applicant shall post a bond or make a deposit with the town in the amount of dollars to be determined to guarantee conformity with the provisions or conditions of the permit. The guarantee shall be deposited with the town prior to commencement of operations under this permit. The town may use the bond or deposits in the event the applicant does not comply with all the terms and conditions of the permit and complete all restoration in a manner satisfactory to the board and in accordance with the permit. Significant public safety hazards exist which will not be addressed by the applicant, or material environmental damage has resulted from the earth removal activity and remediation will not be addressed by the applicant in a manner satisfactory to the board. Question on appropriate bond amount. Either John or Phil, do you have a recommendation there for that bond amount?
I think through the chair, we usually do about $10,000.
Okay, is that reasonable? Phil?
Yeah, yeah,
Is that
no,
reasonable?
I don't know that it's that significant. You know, I think certainly you could do a lot of remediation with $10,000. That's fine.
Okay, so I'm going to propose that we list that bond amount at $10,000. 4, after completion of work authorized by this earth removal permit, the owner applicant shall submit an as-built plan prepared by a registered professional engineer showing grades at the conclusion of the operation. The board shall release the bond after the submission of an as-built plan, the determination that all permit conditions have been met, and when sufficient time is elapsed to ascertain that vegetation planted has successfully been established and that drainage is satisfactory. 5, earth removal activities shall occur only between the hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday and 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturday, with traffic on public roadways limited during the school commuting hours and in accordance with the traffic management plan to be prepared in conjunction with the town. The traffic management plan shall be completed and in place prior to commencement of construction. 6, in the event that any of the permit conditions are not faithfully observed and performed, the board shall have the authority to revoke the permit at any time in accordance with the provisions of the earth removal bylaw. 7, this permit is not assignable. 8, the duration of the permit shall be for 24 months, which will start on the date that earth removal activity commences. The applicant shall notify the planning board and the earth removal agent in writing of the commencement date at least 48 hours in advance. 9, the applicant shall allow town inspectors to periodically enter the site to verify that erosion control barriers and other stormwater mitigation infrastructure is functioning properly and being actively maintained. 10, the applicant shall submit a photographic survey of Wilson Street and Legacy Farms Road North in the vicinity of the project prior to and upon completion of earthwork activity. The photographic survey shall clearly show the conditions of the roadways that are to be used during the project before and after earthwork activity commences. The applicant shall be responsible for repairing and damage to the roadway caused by the project. And 11, earth removal activities shall not commence until all required permits and approvals have been obtained.
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Town council sent over on Friday 3 other proposed conditions. I can either read them to you or they should be in your inbox if you would like to read.
Yes, I was just looking at those you sent over this afternoon, and I wanted to make sure that those do in fact apply to the earth removal permit. It looks like they do. So that would be condition number 12. The applicant shall provide prompt notice to the town's principal planner of any changes, including minor variations to the project design, data, activities, or assumptions as presented to and voted on by the planning board. Following such notice, no changes to the project design or activities shall be constructed or implemented without further approval by the principal planner or planning board. And 2, the applicant shall immediately comply with and stop with any stop work order or directive issued by the principal planner or planning board in connection with the evaluation of any changed design, data, activities, or assumptions. The planning board may respond to such notice, require the applicant to file a request for a modification to any approval previously issued by the planning board, deny permission to the applicant to construct or implement any changes described in the notice, or take such action as the planning board deems appropriate. The principal planner is authorized to order all work ceased in response to any failure by the applicant to provide prompt notice as required by this condition. Number 13, the applicant shall provide concurrent notice to the principal planner for any release of or other incident involving hazardous or other materials that the applicant provides to any federal or state regulator, including notifications pursuant to 310 CMR 40.0333 or 40 CFR Part 110, 40 CFR Part 117, or 40 CFR Part 302. Said notice shall be provided to the principal planner no later than 2 hours following any such release. The applicant shall promptly provide to the principal planner such further information as may be requested by the administrator concerning such a release. And then the last one, which would be number 14, the applicant shall concurrently file with the principal planner copies of any filings or other submissions made to any federal, state, or local board, official, or other governmental or quasi-governmental entity that in any way relates to the subject matter of this project.
And through the chair, that was recommended that those conditions be added to the earth removal and stormwater management permit.
All right, any questions, comments, or discussion with regards to the conditions as read? Or any further additions that people want to consider?
Through the chair, these 3 new conditions, are those in the package? I couldn't find them.
They are not. That's why we read them aloud. I realize I'm a visual person too, so it's helpful to see it.
Through the chair,
John, go ahead.
Sorry, these were sent on Friday, so the packet had already gone out. And Friday late morning, so.
I'm looking at ones that says 823 file. But anyways, we can, I think reading loud would certainly help.
Okay, is everyone comfortable with the proposed conditions?
Gary, would it be possible, I'm sorry, would it be possible if you read the 3 additional ones? Because I don't know if I got that email or I wasn't familiar with I apologize.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have a suggestion.
Yeah, I was just Yes, go ahead, Dave. I think I
Can
know
we
your
just put them up
suggestion
on the
is, but
screen? Can we just put them up on the screen while you, so folks can
Yes.
take a look at it for a minute?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Yeah, that's
I think that makes sense. John, can you pop those up?
Can everyone see this?
It just got smaller. Can you make it a little bigger, please? Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, just to summarize, it sounds like this is all communication with the principal planner, and I'm fine with it. Thank you.
For everyone else, another couple
Yeah,
minutes.
this looks good. Sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good call, Dave. I know these are easier to process when we can see them.
I'm a totally visual person.
Yeah, I have a question. I have a question for John. Is 2 hours typically the time frame? And in the case that something does like hazardous spill, what do you as the principal planner do?
So this is something I have not dealt with. This is purely from town council, so I'm going to rely on their expertise to say that 2 hours is appropriate. In reality, I am not going to be the only one receiving this. It's going to be the fire chief mostly, who's the head of the Department of Emergency Management, that's going to be taking action on this. So it's really just for my notification, so I'm not in the dark. But I will not likely be the point person should there be a spill. It would be others who are trained for that, have expertise in that, and are otherwise better equipped to handle that type of thing than me. I'm just going to be one of the people notified.
Okay, thank you.
So could I just ask a question on that timing? Because there are different.
Sorry, go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chair. Sorry. So under the reference here is to 310 CMR 4, which is the Massachusetts contingency plan. And there are different reportable conditions that have different timing under the MCP. So some are 2 hours, some are 72 hours, and there's one that goes up to 120 days. Is it, I guess, is there an allowance here to modify the time to be consistent with that reportable conditions as required in the Massachusetts contingency plan?
I think that's a reasonable request, and I'm generally an advocate for aligning with other guidelines. Any other response from planning board members?
Through the chair, do we know what those timelines are?
I think per Tracy's comments, it depends on what the incident is.
Right. So then do we need to kind of like blow this up a little bit more to be specific or aligned to?
I guess my thought would be to reword it so that the said notice shall be provided to the principal planner in accordance to timelines outlined in which number was it, Tracy?
Yeah, it's the Massachusetts contingency plan. It's the 310 CMR 4.
310
Sorry, 310 CMR 40 are the regulations associated with the Massachusetts contingency plan.
To the chair, for John, do we have any precedents of this type of condition that we can refer to, or AMCP applied before?
No.
Not that I'm aware of, but John, are you aware of any
No.
precedent? And, and this is, candidly, this is just, I think this is largely in response to previous incidents that have occurred that notification was not completed. So I think this is just an opportunity for us to make crystal clear our expectations of notification if an event occurs.
Makes sense, yeah. Thanks.
Comment? Comment?
Yes, Katie.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, they do have a history of not reporting spills of hazardous waste, and they have a history of not reporting it for days. So they have spilled hazardous waste, and they have not reported it for days, and they've spilled it into the waterways of Massachusetts, which go past my house into the Hopkinton Reservoir. So I would say that we should not change this language, that they have not earned, the 2 hours. They need to report within 2 hours. The last time they spilled something, I had to report it. I reported it to the fire chief.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
2 days after they spilled it.
Okay, Katie, we hear your point. I think that's why we're including a specific condition here.
Well, I think the 2 hours.
I'm not going to debate this with you.
Yeah, the 2 hours
We're
is
aware of the
appropriate.
situation. We're addressing it. But unless the planning board feels otherwise, my inclination is to write this condition so that it's aligned with the Massachusetts contingency plan, because I certainly don't have the experience or authority to determine when a faster response is necessary. So that's my recommendation, and I'll ask the planning board if they have an opinion as to whether we align with the Massachusetts contingency plan, or if we should do something different here. Fran's in deep thought.
Yeah, I'm debating this, Gary, because I would think town council would be aware or cognizant of the Massachusetts contingency plans and the different scenarios. So I am curious as to why they specifically called out 2 hours rather than having it mapped out as you kind of put in here, aligning with the mass contingency plan format.
Okay.
To the chair.
Members, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I was kind of debating the same thing Fran was thinking about. Perhaps we could just consult town council about this particular change. I do not think that we necessarily can require notice prior to what the Massachusetts contingency plan may say, but I definitely want town council to comment on this.
Yeah, may I?
Sure, go ahead, Jim.
Just Tracy or I guess the rest of my group here, where we're talking, I mean, a relatively low risk operation. We're not, this is really excavators, and we're not building anything. We're not constructing much out there that really puts any risk on the table here. Can we get by with 2 hours for this one? And then, in future permit applications, if we feel like this is going to be a condition, we can discuss that maybe prior to kind of hopefully the closing meeting on that application. Is this something, Mike, that you can manage with the contractor if we had some incident? I don't think there's a high risk related to this work on site, but I'll leave it to you to make that decision.
Yeah, Jim, we've made provisions in speaking with the contractor scope of work that any fueling that they have to accomplish to execute the work is done off site. they will have proper spill containment around their portable generators and such. So, to your point, with the limited kind of possibility of a release that triggers this 2-hour requirement, I'm okay with that.
Dan or Tracy, do you have any major heartburn over this specific item? I don't know. I think it needs more thought if, for some of the other work that we do, but specific to this project, perhaps we can live with it on this one being, extra sensitive to reporting requirements.
Yeah, Jim, I would agree with Mike's assessment as well. For this particular work, it's really typical excavation work, so no real significant different kind of equipment coming in. So I don't see it as an issue.
Okay.
Great.
So what I'm hearing here is we strike that modification. We go back to the original condition as written by town council.
Thank you.
Through the chair, may I add just that I like the idea of following a standard or a framework when it exists. And I think if everyone agrees, certainly this modification or the original can be reinstated. But I would suggest that we take this opportunity to consult with the town council in parallel, just so we are aware in the future how we can best address this situation.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I think that the applicant, just in an effort to keep this moving along, is willing to abide or conform to the more stringent expectation there. So
I would agree with that. One final comment, Mr. Chair. Did the town council say that those 3 conditions will also apply to the other one too? So I do think, to Shadul's point, getting clarity from town council as if 2 hours across the board or aligning with the mass state guidelines would be okay. So I think for this one, I think we're all kind of, yes, let's move forward. But I think the other one, which we're probably not going to get to tonight, but I'm not driving the ship, clarity would be would behoove everyone.
yeah. Okay. So those are our proposed conditions. At this point in the outline, we'll go to final public comment. Is there any additional public comment that we have not already discussed or that is relevant to the earth removal permit? All right, not seeing anything out there. All right, so we've already voted on the findings. So now we can go ahead and vote on the approval itself. So I will entertain a motion that the board grants an earth removal permit under Chapter 96 of the general bylaws, granting the previously approved waiver and subject to the conditions that were previously read aloud by the chair.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Rob Benson, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. And Sundar, did you have a question?
No, I thought I was seconding. I turned out to be on mute, Mr. Chair, but that's fine.
Got it, no worries. All right, any further discussion? All right, then we'll go ahead and move to our roll call votes. So we'll start with Mary. How do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I feel like I participated and heard all the conversation and that's sufficient to vote. So I vote yes, but if you would like me to, I can abstain.
Okay. Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Manan, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. So the last step here is I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing for the earth removal permit at 52 Wilson Street.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Deborah Feinberg, second.
All right, and assuming no further discussion.
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Just clarification on whether Dave Paul voted or not. Was it an abstention or was it a vote?
You know, Dave, I would recommend you abstain because it's non-material. I think it's just a little cleaner that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. All right, so we have a motion and a second, and I'm assuming no further discussion. So we'll take a vote on closing this hearing. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Manan, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes as well. Okay, really quickly, before we dig into the stormwater permit discussion, I just want to check in really quickly with the Turkey Ridge folks, because I know that Beta had provided their comments back to you, I think about 11 days ago. And John, have we seen any further response from the Turkey Ridge folks? I'm just kind of trying to think through how much time we commit to the stormwater approval tonight. I wanted to make sure that we save some time for the Turkey Ridge folks.
I have not received a response letter to Beta's comments from Turkey Ridge.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Bill Malkadow here. Poor timing on this end. I was away last week, left shortly after we received the letter from Beta. So we had a brief staff meeting to discuss it this afternoon, but we have not had the opportunity to really dive into the comments.
Okay. So if that's the case, does it make sense for us to just continue our discussion until you have a chance to go through those and hopefully work a little bit more with Beta to address their concerns before we go through a deeper public discussion?
I think it makes a lot of sense based on how things went last time with Conley Farm. I think we can do an awful lot offline, but I see the two applicants here on the call, but I'm not sure they're following along closely. So if you want to give me a minute, I can see if I can catch up with those folks and give you an informed answer.
Okay. And all right, let's go ahead and so we'll go back to, if you want to circle up with them. I do want to wrap by 10 o'clock tonight, and so I know that we can pretty easily consume probably a big chunk of that time on the other Wilson Street project. But if you think there are things, or if you have specific questions that you want to discuss tonight, then we can certainly carve out some time to get to that. Sound reasonable?
Sure. Let me get with my people, and we'll be back in touch.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go ahead and shift gears to the stormwater management permit for 52 Wilson Street. And
motion to open the hearing.
Oh, we already did.
Oh, you did? Okay, sorry. In the beginning, you opened them all. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. And just from an outline perspective, just to remind people where we're at, we did go through the project introduction from the applicant, the staff report, the initial Beta report, and the site visit. I'm wondering if maybe it makes sense to quickly go through the unresolved issues or the outstanding, I should say, the outstanding Beta comments. I feel like that, just from a process perspective, that probably makes a little bit more sense since we already went through the initial Beta comments.
Through the chair.
Yes.
The applicant sent a response this afternoon. I sent it to Beta, and Beta was able to turn it around before the meeting. The new letter from Beta is in the shared folder, but it may work best for Beta to just kind of address what's still outstanding so that they can clarify items that no longer need to be discussed.
Okay. So could one of you pull up that response? And
I will share that letter.
Keeping things visual, and then Phil, if you want to walk through those remaining outstanding items.
So yeah, so there's a couple. I did notice that the revised plans didn't have a new date on them. And they did not have stamps and signatures. So there's two general comments relative to those. The do you have my letter? That might be helpful. There's two other comments that are fairly insignificant relative to the, one is just updating a table similar to what they did, the peak rate of runoff. It's just a housekeeping thing. And then the soil tests, we don't have the soil tests that are required. I don't think it's likely to be an issue. And therefore I think it could be conditioned. So there's four relative, other than the other conditions that we recommended. There are no, those are relatively small and could be conditioned if the board so chooses, but so.
Sorry, John, can you, or John or Phil, can one of you pull up Beta's
Yeah,
letter?
I'm pulling up. I brought up the wrong one.
Okay.
So yeah, page 2 would indicate where the general comments, additional general comments. So I think just the resubmission of the plan set and calculations with new dates, just to make sure that we identify which is the most current. And then if you go down to like 7 and 8, SW 7 and 8. So the bylaw requires to identify volumes of runoff. So the table that they provided only identifies a volume runoff for the 100-year storm. So I think it should be updated relative to similar to the table 3-2, which identifies the peak rate of runoff. Again, it's probably not going to change anything, but it's just a housekeeping thing. And then SW8 is the soil tests are required to make sure that there's a separation to groundwater for all the stormwater basins, and also to confirm the soil texture, so we can have a reasonable certainty that we'll get the infiltration rate that the design is proposing. So as it's indicated here in the comment, is that those tests will be done this week. And if they come back, favorable, then I don't think there's any changes. So.
Okay. So it sounds like the primary one for us to be discussing here is those soil tests. I mean, I'm looking at the applicant now, but it seems like those other changes are probably more administrative and pretty easy, but the soil testing is going to require a bit more work. Just to the applicant, how do you recommend we address these outstanding concerns from Beta?
We are scheduled to do those test pits this week. We had originally hoped that we would have them done today, but the weather was working against us. So, I mean, ideally, we'd like to close out today and, would be happy to have that as a condition. At this time, we don't expect there to be any significant changes in the soil type based on what we've seen elsewhere on site. But it could be conditioned such that, if there are, if the soils aren't what we expect them to be, then, we would need to relook at our stormwater design.
Okay. To the planning board, and again, I'm not making any assurances we're going to get to a vote because I realize there's a lot of details to go through, but are people generally comfortable putting forth a condition that the soil tests be completed as described or recommended by Beta?
Through the chair, yes. Based on our experience with this this general site and the soil types there. But obviously the applicant is taking a risk, you know, if there needs to be a redesign of the stormwater, so would have to come back through us.
Okay. All right. So I appreciate all the work behind the scenes, because I know there was a lot of outstanding comments from Beta. So appreciate the applicant working through those. So going back to our outline, we have the decision criteria discussion. And this one, the wordage is reasonably straightforward, although I realize there's a lot more detail here. The decision criteria is the board must determine if the proposed work complies with the Hopkinton stormwater regulations, which in turn require compliance with the Mass DEP stormwater standards. And that if waivers are requested, the board must determine whether it's appropriate to grant them based on whether the action is allowable by federal, state, and local statutes and or regulations. The action is in the public interest, and the action is not inconsistent with the purpose and intent of the bylaw. And it is worth noting that, just looking to confirm here, that there are no requested waivers associated with this stormwater management application. So let's get into discussion on compliance with those stormwater regulations. And we've had Beta's review. Are there, and we'll start with the board, are there questions or comments with regards to this application and how this application complies with our stormwater regulations? Are there questions or comments from the public with regards to how this application complies with our stormwater regulations? Katie, we'll unmute you. Go ahead, Katie. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I submitted 3 questions regarding this stormwater application. I submitted them before the last hearing, but I have received no answers. So I don't know if this is the appropriate time to put those questions up, and people can read them, and we can, I mean, I asked 3 questions. What, a month ago?
So John, if you want to go ahead and pull up Katie's email, it is in the files for this project, but let's go ahead and pull those up, and we can discuss each of them.
You want me to read them or what?
You know what, why don't I do this? I'll quickly read them, and then we'll get the applicant's perspective on that question. So question 1, the existing drainage conditions at the Eversource facility in Wilson Street are shown in the attached photos. Water regularly drains from the Eversource facility into Wilson Street, extending 4 to 5 feet into the road, and I would agree. During the cold months, the water freezes and poses a public safety hazard. The water from the Eversource facility crosses Wilson Street at Rafferty Road, Legacy Farms North, and continues on towards Route 85. During the cold months, the water freezes and poses a public safety hazard at the intersection of Wilson Street and Rafferty Road, all the way to Route 85. Please add these photos to the public folder. And concerning the existing substandard drainage conditions at the Eversource facility have not been acknowledged and addressed in the stormwater management permit application that Eversource has submitted. So to the applicants, we'll start with you. Do you have a response to this concern raised by Ms. Towner?
Tracy, do you have any thoughts on this one? I think when we talked about this, I mean, specific to where this first picture is, that's not even our property that it's shedding off of. Is that correct?
Correct. We walked this when we did the site visits for this project, at least with the Conservation Commission consultant. And this is actually property that's further north on along the east. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I have my right directions, along the east side of Wilson Street. And then with specifics to this project is that currently the stormwater from the project site where we're currently working, that water sheet flows and is not currently contained or treated in any manner. And this project will be improving conditions by capturing that storm water and detaining it on site and treating it as well.
So I think in summary, while that area we don't believe is water from our property, at the end of the day, the project we're proposing directly impacts or betters this concern, at least for the water that does generate from our property. Currently, there is no stormwater system, I don't believe, on the eastern portion of the site. And so this proposed project would certainly be an enhancement for the site itself.
So Jim, I got to ask, if the water is not coming from your site, then how does your stormwater management plan improve the water that's on the road?
Well, I think further up, further south on Wilson Street, there is an area that discharges to one of the few catch basins that are on that road that then discharge over onto the western portion of the road of our site. It's a little bit of an odd arrangement. I know we've discussed this with the DPW in the past to try to jointly work on some improvements out there, but it's a little bit complicated. So I don't think that the pictures that are shown here we have any direct impact on, but we do recognize that we do discharge water, or there is water that comes from our portion of the property down further south on this, and then that goes down to our impoundment basin and then down towards Legacy Farms North.
You wanted to show what you say is your property?
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. Do we have a map, and you can just sort of visually?
I do actually. I could show, if you don't mind. I don't mind sharing my.
You haven't shown the pictures. I think the pictures also include. It shows the fence and it shows the street pole and everything, and it's right at your driveway. That is your property, 52 Wilson.
That area is not. I'm happy to screen share, and I can show you the property owners, but we have fairly little frontage on Wilson Street in that area. All right, let me.
That's not your driveway?
That is our driveway, but that's not where the picture is. So
well, that's where the water's coming from.
Hang on, Katie. We don't allow back and forth debate or discussion here. So we'll get to it in a second, but all discussion needs to be through me as the chair.
Are you able to see the slide deck? Or
yes, we can, Jim.
So just, I guess, just for giving folks a little bit of layout, the green is Eversource property it's owned by Hopkinton LNG Corp, but a subsidiary of Eversource. Orange is Tennessee Gas Co., which I guess is Kinder Morgan. And then red is the, this really has nothing to do with this, but this is the deeded restricted buffer to Legacy Farms that we had worked out with them. So I think the area that photo is taken is generally in this area. The driveway coming up into the property actually is an easement on Tennessee Gas's property. So really, where you see the pipe bridge crossing, it's a little zoomed out here, but the pipe bridge crossing is from there, probably south, maybe about 150 feet or so, is the Eversource property. You can see it's kind of a narrow swath coming up into the main property. So I think the picture that is shown is primarily kind of in this area here. So we don't have a lot of ability to do much with that. Now, the project that we're discussing right now is up in this area, and that, adds some retention up in this area. We do have some discharge that comes down here, grabs in a catch basin, I believe gets conveyed across down our side of the property. There's a couple of the town catch basins along the road here, I think, that discharge this direction onto the property. I think, Tracy, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so Jim, can you just quickly explain the improvements and how that water will flow to just sort of explain the improvement that you described previously?
I guess from my perspective, similar to the liquefier project where we were required to grab all the stormwater in this area, we're conveying that to a new, I guess, retention basin over here. We're basically doing the same thing. So we're gathering all this area up here that otherwise would have sheet flowed down this section of the property and ultimately either, I guess, infiltrated into the riprap and stone that we had, or what didn't would have conveyed, down onto the street, which is, I think, the basis of the concern here is that there's, water on the street. And you certainly do get an awful lot of that down and through here. I think that's, generally fairly well known, but, presumably this water would have gone somewhere. It would have either infiltrated or continued down towards the roadway. We believe that this project, at a minimum gathers this square footage out here of water that otherwise would have to sheet flow somewhere. Some of that would be, again, infiltrated, and some of that may move down towards the roadway.
Okay.
But I guess unlike some other projects where, we'd be adding additional impervious surface or otherwise that you might see in town with maybe a new parking lot, we're not increasing the impervious surface, I don't believe, as part of this project. And so we're really adding, I think, a benefit to the area. We're adding a stormwater system that otherwise, doesn't exist.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jim. Super helpful visual description there. Katie, go ahead.
Right. So I think that your assertion that the water flows, through this little green sliver here, the water flows where the water flows. So the water does not going to flow in conformance to the little lines you've drawn. There's a huge volume of water. Just in the past year, the end of a 3-year process, further down on Wilson Street, the developer corrected a very similar problem with the construction of a very, very large basin. So this problem seems to be very similar, and I think that to assert that no water is coming from your area, I don't think you have any data to support that. So the topography and the issue occurs and was solved in the abutting parcels to you. So it has the appearance of the same issue, and I don't think what you've proposed is going to address what has to be your portion of the issue.
Okay.
Maybe some of the flow
Thank you,
originates
Katie.
someplace
Thank you,
else,
Katie.
but your portion of the flow.
Thank you, Katie. Katie, thank you. I'm going to defer to our stormwater expert, Mr. Paradis. And Mr. Paradis, I'm wondering if we can get your professional opinion as to whether the stormwater management plan that's being proposed effectively manages the stormwater produced on this parcel.
Sure, I can give my input here. If you can let me share my screen, I have another map that I'd like to show. All right, can you see that map?
Yes.
So this is the US, this is Oliver. It's the Mass GIS website. And it shows you, I did this because it generally has the topography of the area. And the proposed turnaround area and work is actually at the top of the hill. And you can see that some of the water drains in this direction and would, you know, you don't have the micro, you know, the driveways and such, but there are catch basins down here as was identified. But the stormwater, the area from this drains in three different directions: this way, and this way. So they have included stormwater basins that basically contain the water within the site and providing some infiltration, and the ultimate outlet drains in this direction. Well, once it drains in this direction, it doesn't go onto Wilson Street. It drains over through this wetland and then ultimately through this wetland system. So we purposely asked them to differentiate between the three watersheds to make sure that this flow was not increasing overall. So they are providing the other basin flows in this direction. So this project, though I know I am completely sensitive to the issues related to the stormwater in this area because we've looked at it so much. My colleague walked the site with the design team, and clearly there's a development here, and also the poor soils provide a fairly significant amount of runoff to the street. But I don't think this particular area that's being developed is a prime concern relative to those flows.
So Phil, if I can just kind of summarize, what I'm hearing you say is that the work that they have proposed, that is your professional opinion that the stormwater system is effectively addressing the area in which the work is being proposed, but that because that is upstream, that there still could be some impact from this property on overall stormwater.
So yes, there's obviously you develop an existing conditions model, and then you develop all the improvements or changes relative to surface condition and all the BMPs and a proposed model. And there is flow from this area going toward Wilson Street, but this project does not increase it. It slightly decreases it. So,
okay. Questions or comments from the board members on this particular topic?
Through the chair, I certainly comment how Katie Towner have presented and gathered the information and for her commentary. I am trying to understand this problem for the proposed storm water management system. Is it supposed to, I'm trying to find out, is it gonna add to the problem is what the challenge is being presented, or the ask is that it should also take into account a long-term solution for this challenge?
Yeah.
Is that something we can clarify?
So my interpretation is that it is going to slightly improve the situation, and it's effectively going to address the stormwater issues in the area of construction, but it is not going to solve all of the stormwater issues in the vicinity of Wilson Street and Legacy Farms North.
Thank you for the clarification. That's what I thought, and hence I think this is a step forward in a positive direction, improving it, not solving it entirely as you just mentioned, but seems to be in the right direction. Is that so? That's a commentary I just wanted to add.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
Just to build on the conversation that we were just having. Obviously, Phil pointed out that we've looked at this area a lot in the past. We've had a couple of developments on Legacy North Farms Road, and Katie has brought up some good concerns about this drainage. I wish we kind of have known that before we did the site walk, but it is what it is. But what I was just, and I agree that it sounds like it's going to only improve this drainage for this project if necessary. But what I'd like to suggest is that we have a separate agenda item in the future to work with the DPW and try to find out where the problem is on this road, because we've kind of gone back and forth on this, and I saw like 6 different property owners, and I don't know where the problem is. So I'd like to suggest that we add an agenda item in the future.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of problems over there, and unfortunately, the last 6 months or so in particular have really highlighted. Sounds like a positive word, but we know there's been a lot of problems over there. It's complicated. There's different property owners. John, I guess we're going off topic a little bit here, but I'm curious if you have any recommendations as to how we can do a better job of assessing stormwater management across multiple properties, or even if there's a way to do that when they're not coming before the board with a project of some kind.
Yeah, so it's always tricky because there's just a variety of factors that come into play. We really can only review the stormwater impacts of developments before the planning board. I'm sure there can be a stormwater study town-wide, but that's a whole separate issue to look at how stormwater can be managed. The other issue is stormwater standards change, but developments that have been done in the past kind of stuck with the standards as they were developed. And even that being said, I feel like stormwater calculations are changing very quickly with respect to climate change, and I don't know if they can even keep up with the change of climate change impacts. So, I mean, we're moving forward with what we've got, but can't really go back on older developments. So yeah, Phil probably could answer more.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So I didn't want to distract this meeting, and so that's why I was suggesting we just add an agenda item. And I think it would be beneficial to get John Westerling out there on a site walk with us. And I think that we should just table it and leave it at that.
Yeah, I actually like that suggestion, and yeah, I think it's important to have Mr. Westerling involved, because we all are aware of a lot of issues on those streets. So I think that's a worthwhile suggestion.
Thank you.
May I just to the chair, I can't make any commitments to any major improvements out there, but we certainly would welcome participating in that. I know we've reached out to the DPW in the past. Certainly a lot of that stormwater gets transferred down onto the 55 Wilson Street side, which is our property there, and then gets conveyed over Legacy Farms North. And we've discussed, internally what some solutions might be, but at the end of the day, it's kind of I'll say a neighborhood type of an issue. So we're more than happy to work with others to see if we can collaborate and come up with something that improves that area. So.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Fran, anything else before we move on?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, Mr. Chairman, is just a comment back to, or a question back to Jim in terms of what specifically would your organization look to do to address some of that water issue, because I am intimately familiar with this and my head is about ready to explode on this one. the water comes out, it's subsurface water that drains out through from your property and the Tennessee Gas property, from the top of the hill all the way through. There's been no addressing on this. There's no drainage. There's no, nothing's been trenched or dug. And even if there was, the trucks go by and they kind of destroy it, right? So it becomes flat and then just kind of percolates all the way across from east to west on that road, starting, somewhere somewhat on your property and then all the way down to the Tennessee Gas, through that restricted property. So come December through March, you're taking, it's a little tricky to kind of get through there when it's icy and wet and whatnot. So I appreciate all the kind efforts and thoughts about trying to fix this, but I would love some definitive action, because just to have to go through another winter and more traffic comes through that intersection almost on a daily basis as more and more housing developments occur in Legacy North, and there's more and more walkers than there have ever been that come around there, and they have to walk now because the sidewalk is there all the way through what would be Old Rafferty. So it becomes more of a pedestrian safety issue, even though they put the four-way stops, which is great. But I don't know how we're going to hold everyone's feet to the fire to actually get something done that's going to have a positive and demonstrable impact to this area.
Yeah. So thanks, Fran, for that. I think we're all in agreement and appreciate your additional input and color. But I think that per Dave's suggestion, I think that's a bigger discussion of which we need more people at the table. And let's go ahead and schedule that, because I'm not sure that I think that's a bigger topic than what we're discussing here. Katie, you want to move on to your second question / comment?
Well, I just wanted to comment on something you said, Gary. The planning board does actually have jurisdiction over stormwater regulations. And it doesn't just have to be when somebody comes before the board. If somebody is discharging stormwater, then you do have jurisdiction to, cite them with a violation of the regulations. So you do have that jurisdiction currently.
Yeah, John, we talked about this a little bit earlier today. Do you want to?
So permits like so permits like the stormwater and earth removal permit are construction level permits. Once the thing has been constructed and occupied, the planning board's jurisdiction is usually pretty minuscule, if there at all. When SWIPs are approved, the planning board decisions usually reference that the SWIP needs to be submitted to the planning board. However, if you look at the SWIPs, they're usually under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. The planning board's enforcement is really through the zoning enforcement officer. And unless there is enforcement provided for in the permit, they would essentially go by the zoning or any other regulation that's before them. I know Ms. Towner and I have talked about this in the past, and discharges to the municipal stormwater system, which includes roadways and swales within the right-of-way, is really the jurisdiction of the DPW, and any appeals of decisions of the DPW becomes jurisdiction of the planning board as the appeal board. They don't actually enforce the discharge issues to the municipal stormwater system. So I've talked to Kim Chair McCauley, who's the new conservation administrator, about having a sit down with DPW to figure out where planning board can get more authority to enforce stormwater issues, since this is not an issue that's going to go away anytime in the near future, since rain events are going to become more frequent and more intense. But as it stands right now, the planning board's authority is generally limited to construction period impacts, and generally does not extend into after the whatever the approved structure or work is done has been completed.
All right, thanks, John.
Chair,
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So just one thing, I just want to before you speak, Shadul, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make sure that we're staying on point for the application at hand. So I realize that there's some sensitivity as to what can we do to improve the situation through this application process, but I want to make sure that we're not overly weighted towards something that's really outside of our discussion for this application. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's where I was going as well. And I was just going to request if John can help us educating in one of the coming sessions, how we can focus on this specific issue and take help from the town's office and DPW.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's in line with the idea of a broader conversation around how we can collectively improve the stormwater issues across all these properties. I think that's right in line. So, Katie, do you want to move on to your second question, comment? And I can just quickly read this. Please ask Eversource to submit the latest GIS survey information from all the surveys they have conducted on their Wilson Street and Legacy Farm Road parcels, including the surveys that were conducted for several weeks during spring of 2021. The drainage map that they included in Appendix B in the stormwater management permit application needs to be updated to show the geographic information points for this stream that empties into Wilson Street as shown in the photos I'm submitting. The path of this stream needs to be traced back to the contributing sources of its flow and included on the drainage map to properly document the existing conditions as required by the stormwater management permit application. So again, I'll defer to the applicant and see if they have any comments or response to Ms. Towner's second bullet. Jim.
Tracy or Dan, I'll need some help because I don't.
For the proposed work, what was provided on the plan set was a recent survey. So that, details what is up there on the site currently.
Okay, and Katie, you're feeling that it doesn't represent what's currently on the site?
It's not the most recent. They've been out there surveying. The permit said that they did a survey in January, but they've been out there surveying in the spring. So many weeks. There's been many surveyors out there. So I spoke with the surveyors myself, and they told me what they were doing. And I think that in good faith that Eversource should submit the latest surveys they have for all of the the wetland surveys that they've been performing, that they should, in good faith submit those with this to show, all of these were done in the spring. So these were much better than the one they did in, whatever. They should submit the latest information.
Tracy, is what you've submitted not the most recent information that you have?
It's the most recent information that we have for the work area that we're working within.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the more recent work is not related to this project, it's related to something else.
Mike, do we have any other, did you do any other surveys? I mean, we have a survey crew on site every day related to the liquefier project, laying out where pieces of equipment and foundations will be installed. So, where they were laying out the new scale that's related to that project, I mean, there very well likely was a survey crew out in the road. I don't know specifically what that, I mean, we'd need a little bit of clarity on what group was out there and I guess what they were doing.
Yeah. Okay, so and Kate, I'll give you a chance to respond. I do want to avoid a he said she said here because but I know you want to respond, so go ahead.
Right, so this goes back to kind of not answering the question. She's saying that she submitted the most recent information for that parcel she's discussing, but unfortunately, water doesn't flow within the confines of the parcel that she's discussing. Water flows where water flows. And the question was, you know, they've done all these wetland water flow surveys that show how water flows over all the property and actually through the property. I mean, water is coming down and it's flowing through their properties and making its way. So, you know, in good faith, they should disclose the information they have. And what she said is, yes, there is more recent information, but she's trying to not release it by saying that it's, you know, it's points outside this limited parcel, which, you know, for water flow, you know, water doesn't just stay in one area.
So number one, I want to not sort of assume intent on behalf of our applicant. And certainly that's just, I don't think it's that's not a something we want to get into here. You know, and I'm curious if other folks have perspective on this, but at the end of the day, I think what they submitted complies with our application requirements. You know, and the reality is, I think that the timeline of wetland mapping is, I want to say it's either 2 or 3 years, I think, that those hold. So to me, there's not much more we can do here. And like I said, I don't want to get into a position of trying to guess intent on behalf of the applicant. Katie.
So I wasn't insinuating any intent on the part of the applicant. But the applicant did state that they want to be a part of the overall solution. They want to be a part of the larger process. So to that point, if they would, you know, share all of the information that shows the water flow across these properties, then that would be, you know, that would be a show of good faith that they're sincere in wanting to, you know, solve the problem because they have the data.
All right. Any other, looking to the board, any other comments or questions with regards to this discussion point 2?
I think you stated it accurately. Thank you.
Okay. And then the third question concern from Ms. Towner, the calculations for the estimated total runoff that Eversource is submitting in the stormwater permit application should be revisited based on the actual volume of stormwater runoff to Wilson Street from the neighboring trails project and the size of the drainage basin that the developer needs to construct to stem the flow of stormwater into Wilson Street and address the public safety hazard. My instinct is that this gets to that broader discussion because this is multiple properties and it's well beyond the scope of this particular project. But again, I'll defer to the applicant first and see if they have other comments with regards to this this request.
I'll chime in, and I would agree with
breaking up
what you just
Yeah,
said.
who's talking is breaking up.
Jared.
Tracy, is that you? If it is, you're breaking up and we can't hear you.
I think this
not working.
Nope.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I just have a comment, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I think in looking at all 3 of these, they do all apply to the bigger picture, and I think
Nope. Tracy, You're frozen and we can't hear anything you're saying.
So I think we should just maybe, Katie could present this again when we have that general meeting would be a good suggestion.
Yeah, I agree, Dave. Any other comments from the board with regards to that recommendation from Dave?
My internet connection is.
Sorry, Tracy, it's not working.
Tracy,
As well.
Tracy, you might want to shut off your video. We might be able to hear you better.
I think she might have dropped off there.
Okay.
Okay.
Through the chair, to your point, and Dave's,
How does that
a much
work?
bigger problem than I think has to do with this project. And we do better serve to address it at a different time.
Can you hear me now?
No,
No.
not really.
Unfortunately not, Tracy.
In fact, we might ask you to walk a straight line.
That sounds like you're inside of that hot spring in Sundar's background.
Yeah, there you go.
Out of space.
Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
On behalf of the whole board, I'd like to thank Ms. Towner for the research that she has done and the diligence with which she has consistently presented these issues to us. And it can be very frustrating because, of course, the stormwater is coming from multiple locations, and it's difficult to figure all that out. But I wholeheartedly support Dave's original suggestion, and finding a way for planning board to address this on a larger global scale, so to speak.
Really quickly, I just want to check back with Mr. Markedon and see if, because I do want to, we do have the Turkey Ridge project on the agenda, and before we continue further, I just want to check and see if there were particular topics that you wanted to review. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, Shane had a couple of issues he wanted to take up, just as a status update. So 10 or 15 minutes is what we thought we might need.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so sorry, I know I bounced around a little bit, but back to the stormwater management. With regards to the decision criteria, are there other comments or questions from the board?
Just one about process. I'm not really aware of how much is left to discuss. Are we looking at perhaps voting on this tonight, or do you think it will extend to another meeting?
Yeah, my preference is to get through it if we can, because and I know there's a lot of detail and conditions and things to read, but just in the interest of everyone's time, and I'd rather not. To your point, I think we've got through most of the discussion. We're in the formality phase now, so I'd like to move forward if we can.
Thank you. I would suggest that that's our goal, that we should move forward to it.
Yep.
And through the chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mary.
On the site walk, we all had a chance to really see where the stormwater management basins and outflows will be done, and the improvements that they're making to that site. So I think that addressed a lot of our concerns, and I feel very comfortable with it.
Okay, thanks, Mary. All right, so let's think realistically, just for Mr. Markedon and the Turkey Ridge applicants. Realistically, this will still take a little bit of time, but we'll make sure to save, or if we go a little long, we'll make sure that you have your 10 to 15 minutes. So next on the outline is discussion vote on waivers, and that's a quick one because there are no waivers being requested. As we look at the proposed findings, forward here, The proposed findings would be that the board finds the proposed work will comply with the Hopkinton stormwater regulations with the exception of the following waivers, of which there are none. So I think that's pretty straightforward because there are no waiver requests. Are there other findings that we would want to include here? And I don't want to open a can of worms, but I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to us to clarify or specify something to the effect of what we discussed previously, that I don't know, just contemplating if it's worth providing a little bit of clarity as to what applies to this stormwater application, stormwater management plan.
I know what you're kind of thinking through you, Mr. Chair, but it might actually just cloudy stuff more if we try to do that.
Yeah, that's just what I was having some second thoughts as to, you know, are at that point, are we just creating findings that are already specified within our bylaws? So I'll leave it at that. Do folks have any other findings that they think are worth including in this?
Not for me.
Okay. And then with regards to conditions, there are a lot of those, and I do need to read those aloud.
Are we also going to add the 3 conditions from?
Yes, we are.
Council.
Yep. So let me start reading these. Proposed conditions. Number 1, after finding that it was in the public interest and not inconsistent with the intent and purpose of the stormwater regulations, the planning board waived strict compliance with the following provisions of the stormwater regulation. And actually, this one I think is not required because there are no waivers. Is that fair, John?
Correct.
Okay. So we'll eliminate number 1. Number 2, pursuant to the Hopkinton stormwater regulations, the permittee must notify the planning board at least 48 hours prior to the commencement of activities permitted by an SMP and in advance of construction of critical components of the stormwater management facility. Notification shall be writing via letter or email. Number 3, additionally, the applicant shall attend a pre-construction meeting prior to starting clearing, excavation, construction, or land disturbing activity by the permittee. The permittee, technical representative, the general contractor, or any other person with authority to make changes to the project shall meet with the board or its representative to review construction sequencing and the permitted plans and their implementation. Number 4, inspections of the stormwater management system and erosion and sediment control plan during construction shall occur as directed in the stormwater regulations, section 10.0.b. All erosion and sediment control shall comply with the following performance criteria. A, minimize total area of disturbance and protect natural features in soil. B, sequence activities to minimize simultaneous areas of disturbance. Mass clearance and grading of the entire site shall be avoided. C, minimize peak rate of runoff in accordance with the Massachusetts stormwater standards. D, minimize soil erosion and control sedimentation during construction, provided that prevention of erosion is preferred over sedimentation control. E, divert uncontaminated water around disturbed areas. F, maximize groundwater recharge. G, install and maintain all erosion and sediment control measures in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications and good engineering practices. H, prevent offsite transport of sediment. I, protect and manage on and offsite material storage areas. Overburdened stockpiles of dirt, borrow areas or other areas used solely by the permitted project are considered a part of the project. J, comply with applicable federal, state, and local laws and regulations, including waste disposal, sanitary sewer or septic system regulations, and air quality requirements, including dust control. K, prevent significant alteration of habitats mapped by the Massachusetts National Heritage and Endangered Species Program as endangered, threatened, or of special concern. Estimated habitats of rare wildlife and certified vernal pools and priority habitats of rare species from the proposed activities. I, institute interim and permanent stabilization measures, which shall be instituted on a disturbed area as soon as practicable, but no more than 14 days after construction activity is temporarily or permanently ceased on that portion of the site. M, properly manage on-site construction and waste materials. N, prevent off-site vehicle tracking of sediments. O, dust shall be controlled at the site. P, divert off-site runoff from highly erodible soils and steep slopes to stable areas. 6, the project shall comply with the following erosion and sediment control requirements. Prior to any land disturbance activities commencing on the site, the developer shall physically mark limits of no land disturbance on the site with tape, signs, or orange construction fence so that workers can see the areas to be protected. The physical markers shall remain in place until a certificate of completion has been issued. B, appropriate erosion and sediment control measures shall be installed prior to soil disturbance. Measures shall be taken to control erosion within the project area. Sediment and runoff water shall be trapped and retained within the project area. Wetland area and surface waters shall be protected from sediment. C, sediment shall be removed once the volume reaches 1/4 to 1/2 inch the height of a hay bale, or excuse me, 1/4 to half the height of a hay bale. Sediment shall be removed from silt fence prior to reaching the load-bearing capacity of the silt fence, which may be lower than 1/4 to 1/2 the height. Sediment from sediment traps or sedimentation ponds shall be removed when design capacity has been reduced by 50%. E, soil stockpiles must be stabilized or covered at the end of each workday. Stockpile side slopes shall not be greater than 2 to 1. All stockpiles shall be surrounded by sediment controls. F, disturbed area remaining idle for more than 14 days shall be stabilized with seeding, wood chips, bark mulch, tarpaulins, or any approved methods. G, for active construction areas such as borrow or stockpile areas, roadway improvements in areas within 50 feet of the building under construction, a perimeter sediment control system shall be installed and maintained to contain soil. H, a tracking pad or other approved stabilization method shall be constructed at the entrance exit point of the site to reduce the amount of soil carried onto roadways and off the site. I, permanent seeding shall be undertaken in the spring from March through May and in late summer and early fall from August to October 15th. During the peak summer months and in the fall after October 15th, when seeding is found to be impractical, appropriate temporary stabilization shall be applied. Permanent seeding may be undertaken during the summer if plans provide for adequate mulching and watering. J, all slopes steeper than 3 to 1, as well as perimeter dikes, sediment basins, and traps and embankments must, upon completion, be immediately stabilized with sod, seed, and anchored straw mulch or other approved stabilization measures. Area outside of the perimeter sediment control system must not be disturbed. K, temporary sediment trapping devices must not be removed until permanent stabilization is established in all contributory drainage areas. L, all temporary erosion and sediment control measures shall be removed after final site stabilization. Disturbed soil areas resulting from the removal of temporary measures shall be permanently stabilized within 30 days of removal. 7, a minimum of 7 days prior to the start of construction, a detailed construction sequence shall be submitted to the principal planner by the site contractor for review and approval. The approved construction sequence shall be followed throughout the course of the construction and shall be altered only when prior review by and written approval from the principal planner. 8, a copy of the final signed stormwater pollution prevention plan shall be provided to the board prior to construction. 9, all required stormwater construction site inspection reports shall be submitted to the principal planner within 14 days of each inspection. 10, an adequate stockpile of erosion control materials shall be on site at all times for emergency or routine replacement and shall include materials to repair, replace silt fences, hay bales, stone filters, berms, or any other devices planned for use during construction. 11, the disturbed area shall be temporarily stabilized by hydroseeding if construction of a replacement LNG facility is not commenced within 30 days of lot clearing. 12, initial excavation of the proposed stormwater infiltration basin that is to be used as temporary sediment basin during construction shall be limited to 6 to 12 inches above finished grade, and once the site is stabilized, the remaining soil and accumulated sediment shall be excavated prior to laying loam and seed. A note specifying this condition shall be provided in the final plans. 13, construction shall not commence until all required permits and approvals have been obtained. 14, upon permit approval, a wet weather stormwater grab sample shall be collected once per year for 3 years. The stormwater grab sample shall be collected during the spring, March through June, at the piped outlet of the LNG tank impound of the Hopkinton LNG facility. All collected samples shall be analyzed for field parameters and laboratory analytics as required by the 2016 Massachusetts Small MS4 General Permit, Section 2.3.4.7 point B.3.4, and as described on the wet weather outfall inspection and sample collection form that was submitted under the permit application. Following testing, a wet weather outfall inspection and sample collection form shall be provided to the planning board and the Board of Health. Oh, deep breath. Just one quick side note, if anybody's followed these along, we have added a lot of conditions in here in hopes to address some of the past shortcomings that we've had, in particular in that part of town. So there's a lot here, but hopefully that gives us a little bit more teeth and helps avoid some of the situations we've had elsewhere in other sites. We've got a few more. We've got the recommendations from town council, and that the applicant shall provide prompt notice to the town's principal planner of any changes, including minor variations to the project design, data, activities, or assumptions as presented to and voted on by the planning board. Following such notice, no changes to the project design or activities shall be constructed or implemented without further approval by the principal planner or planning board. And secondly, the applicant shall immediately comply with any stop work order or directive issued by the principal planner or planning board in connection with the evaluation of any change, design, data, activities, or assumptions. The planning board may respond to such a notice, require the applicant to file a request for a modification to any approval previously issued by the planning board, deny permission to the applicant to construct or implement any changes described in this notice, or take such action as the planning board deems appropriate. Principal planner is authorized to order all work ceased in response to any failure by the applicant to provide prompt notice as required by this condition. 16, the applicant shall provide concurrent notice of the principal planner for any release or other incident involving hazardous or other materials that the applicant provides to any federal or state regulator, including notifications pursuant to 310 CMR 40.0333 or 40 CFR Part 110, 40 CFR Part 117, or 40 CFR Part 302. Said notice shall be provided to the principal planner no later than 2 hours following any such release. The applicant shall promptly provide to the principal planner such further information as may be requested by the administrator concerning such a release. To the applicant, are you also comfortable with that 2 hour notification with regards to this stormwater plan?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And then next one, the applicant shall concurrently file with the principal planner copies of any filings or other submissions made to any federal, state, or local board, official, or other governmental or quasi-governmental entity that in any way relates to the subject matter of this project. And then the last condition, which I might need a little help, is with regards to the soil testing that we discussed previously. So
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Actually, there should be 3 more conditions. 2 of them addressing the outstanding documents that Beta has identified, and then the third one being the soil testing. So I've got the first 2 written, and I was going to hope Phil could give us some language for the third one. If you'd like me to read the first 2, I can.
Please, that'd be great.
Sure. So the first one being applicant shall submit plans and documents with the appropriate date in conformance with comment G1 of Beta's August 23rd, 2021 letter prior to site work. And the other one is the applicant shall submit stamped and signed plans by a professional engineer in conformance with Beta's letter of August 23rd, 2021 prior to site work. That should be comment G2 of Beta's letter.
With updated dates. Yeah.
Did you get that addition, John?
Yeah. Stamp signed plans with updated dates.
All right, and then the last one with regards to soil testing.
So yeah, I mean, it's just basically the applicant shall provide required soil testing to confirm seasonal high groundwater elevation and soil texture is in conformance with design assumptions.
Okay. Let me give John a second there.
So I guess my concern is if they provide soil testing results that do not conform, how does this condition address that? Do they need to bring it back before Beta? Should it be the applicant shall provide these soil testing results in conformance with design assumptions? to be approved by Beta or to the satisfaction of Beta.
I like the sound of that.
Sounds reasonable.
Does that work for the applicant? I see Jim nodding his head.
Yeah.
Dan, do you have any problems with that? I mean, I don't see an issue with that, but
No, not at all, as long as the mechanics of, we submit it to Phil and Phil replies and the board is satisfied. No issues, that's all.
okay, very good.
All right.
Sorry,
Any
through the
other?
chair.
Oh, go ahead.
Some
John.
minor additions to that. So I think it should be to the satisfaction of Beta and the principal planner. So there's some town responsibility there. And then I would also add prior to site work so that there is a deadline for it.
Okay. That makes sense. Other comments or questions or additions to that list of conditions?
Yeah, through the chair, just that last one had a lot of additions there at the end. Could we just kind of maybe repeat what that last condition actually said?
Go ahead, John.
All right. I kind of fudged Phil's part, so now I got to actually find what the comment is. All right, so the applicant shall provide the required soil testing results. Phil, can we say the applicant shall provide required soil testing results in conformance with design assumptions to the satisfaction of Beta and the principal planner prior to site work? Does that cover it, or should there be more detail? You're muted, Phil.
No, that works. That should be fine.
So I'll read it again. The applicant shall provide the required soil testing in conformance with design assumptions to the satisfaction of Beta and the principal planner prior to site work.
Work for you, Fran?
Works for me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Any final public comment? Okay. Then
Excuse me.
Yes.
Chief Slayman had a comment.
Yes, Chief.
Yeah, if I could just reinforce this access to be able to come in off of Wilson Street from the other side and the improved water is a big deal. So I just want to make sure everybody realizes that's a big deal for us at Public Safety. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So at this point, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the findings and then the permit itself. So I move that the board finds that the proposed work will comply with the Hopkinton stormwater regulations and that there are no waivers associated with these findings.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Okay, any discussion before we vote? And seeing none, we will do our roll call vote. So we'll start with Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Murray, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahadul?
Yes.
Fran?
Fran Dion, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. So then I will entertain a motion that the board approve the stormwater management permits with the conditions as they were previously read aloud by the chair and principal planner.
Sundar Subramanian, so moved.
Mary Larson Marlowe, second.
Right, Sundar with the motion, Mary with the second. Any further discussion? And seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. We'll start with Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Murray, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahadul?
Yes.
Fran?
Yeah, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. So lastly, I will entertain a motion to close this hearing.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Second,
Rajamohan, second.
All right, so I'll do it with the seconds. Assuming no further discussion, we'll vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahadul?
Rajamohan, yes.
Fran?
Andy Young, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. So I will just say, appreciate a really healthy discussion. And again, just to echo Mary's comments, appreciate Ms. Towner's research and all the work that she does on this as an advocate. And I look forward to a discussion across a broader set of stakeholders to see what we can do, because I think that we all acknowledge that there's a mess up there that we've got to figure out a better approach to manage. So appreciate everyone's comments and input and advocacy, and keep an eye out. You know, we're definitely going to continue this discussion and see what else we can do. All right, I know it's 10 o'clock. I did promise the Turkey Ridge folks that we'd commit a few minutes to that. So I don't know if it's Shane or Joe that want to open this discussion.
I can open it.
Okay. Go ahead, Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the planning board. Thank you for having us on. I thank you guys for staying late. Apologize for the time. I didn't know it was going to quite take that long, but I'll be real quick. I just wanted to run through a couple of the items of the meeting from last couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
Just to touch base with them, and then hopefully we can wrap this up and continue on to the next meeting. But the first item I just wanted to run through was the access road. I know you guys had some concerns with the shared driveway on lot 4. Just want to let you know that we're working on separating the two. We just got to do some testing for the septic system so we can move that septic system and relocate the driveway in order to separate the two. The weather hasn't been our friend the last couple of weeks, but we hope to have this resolved with the weather coming in the next couple of weeks. So we should have that squared away for the next meeting. The other item you guys had touched upon was some of the communication agreements with the neighbors. As always, we've been in constant communication with the neighbors. We're in the process of wrapping up some of the drafts to our agreements with all the neighbors, and we'll certainly be sharing those with you guys as soon as we get those wrapped up, which we think is hopefully be done in the next couple of weeks. And then lastly was the trails item. We spent a lot of time talking about the trails that were shown on the plan. Haven't really dove too far into that. We've been playing around with a lot of the septic design and septic locations, which affects a lot of the lots and dives into some of those existing trails. But we're certainly going to keep that on our plate and keep looking into that. But yeah, as Joe mentioned, we kind of ran into some bad luck with the timing of the beta review and going on vacation. We're certainly going to be sending over our comments back to beta this week, and just basically hoping to get on the next meeting and hopefully kind of get some gain some momentum here on our project.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. And I wasn't at the last meeting. I did go ahead and watch the video, and the things you just addressed were kind of what I heard from the discussion as well. So appreciate you guys kind of working through that. I would just say, and as Joe commented earlier, the more work that can be done behind the scenes, the faster that enables us to go. I think you've seen that we rely very heavily on alignment between our peer review engineer and beta and the applicant. So really encourage that back and forth. I guess the only thing that you didn't talk about, which I heard at the last meeting, and this just goes to Rob's comments about, are there things that can be done to, and I don't think this is a big issue, but if there's ways to kind of simplify the property lines a little bit. And again, certainly not a requirement, but I think that just in general cleans things up a lot for us and for future property owners and whatnot. You know, just sort of throwing that out there that I thought it was a good comment from Rob. And if there's an opportunity to simplify those lot lines a little bit, I think that would be easier to manage both for the open space and for those property owners.
Yep. Yeah, we can certainly look into that. I can talk with Joe. I know he's done a great job with trying to fit the septic systems on with the stormwater and meet all the requirements. So, I know it wasn't the easiest, and he's been really doing a great job. So I can certainly get with him about, talking on some of the shapes of those lots.
Okay.
No problem.
Great. So a lot more to come, and just looking at the schedule, we'll take a vote in a second on continuing, but it looks like we've got room on our September 13th meeting, which is our next meeting. I'll just quickly, and again, I think we'll look forward to that beta review. Are there any other comments or questions from the board or from the public before we vote to continue this hearing? Okay. So then, let's see, we can continue to September 13th. Do we need to continue the decision as well? I don't think we do.
No, through the chair, the decision is due October 10th.
Okay. So on that note, I will entertain a motion to continue the hearing for Turkey Ridge Estates to September 13th.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Rob Benson, second.
All right. And assuming no further discussion, we'll vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahdool?
Manan, yes.
Fran?
Fran Dion, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes as well. And I think we'll definitely, we're going to make sure to allot the right amount of time. And again, with progress with beta, I think we should be able to make some good progress there. So appreciate your flexibility tonight. All right. So I think that is it for the night. Just two quick things just to sort of plant in people's minds. Number one, I don't want to get a discussion about it, but curious, at some point, should we consider going back to in-person meetings? So it's not on our agenda for tonight, but maybe at our next meeting, we can talk a little bit more about that. And then secondly, I do want to re-engage on our working groups. So I know that all of those have stagnated a little bit. I know it's been a busy summer, but just want to encourage those working groups to reconvene because it's almost September. So I'll leave it at that. But on that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Second.
All right, assuming no further discussion, we'll vote.
One discussion point, just
Yes.
to you, Mr. Chairman. I will be not at the next meeting. I will be out the next meeting. I have to take my son to college. So.
Okay.
Oh, congratulations.
Enjoy.
There you go. Bring a big check. Bring a big paycheck.
Congratulations on that check.
Oh, yeah.
Best is yet to come.
All right, so we'll go ahead and vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahdool?
Manan, yes.
Fran?
Fran Dion, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Great.
Thank you, Mr.
Bye.
Chair.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job,
Thank you,
everybody.